Today we're talking about how you can avoid units being trapped in combat. Now, I think this is one of the most important things to learn in 40k. I think trapping units in combat is a skill that a lot of top players use, particularly with assault armies, and it can really turn a game when all of a sudden a unit's trapped in combat and it's completely immune from shooting. That can be an absolute disaster for your game plan. So in this video, we're going to quickly go over how you can trap units in combat, because I think it's important that we all get a basic understanding of that. And then we're going to be talking about I've got a 3-step approach of how you can stop your units being trapped in combat. And remember, guys, if you're new to D6 Evolution, we're all about 40k tactics here and about making you guys better 40k players. So welcome guys, it's Andy here from D6 Evolution, and like I said, today we're talking about how you avoid the trap. Now this is a really important lesson, so really pay attention to this one. So let's dive straight in. So let's talk about how you trap units in combat to start with. So it's known as a whole lot of different things, such as some people call it dry tipping, taking hostages, hugging units, whatever you want to call it. We're just going to call it trapping for this video, and it involves essentially positioning your models on 3 different points of an opponent's model in combat. By doing that, they can't actually physically move that model out of combat, and that is huge. That is absolutely huge. And by doing that, because they can't fall out of combat, that assault unit that you've put in combat is now completely immune to your opponent's shooting. Now, this is a really, really powerful trick. I'm just going to go over the common ways that your opponent can do this to you. Okay, so let's go over probably the most common way of pinning models in combat. So what we've got here is we've got our Chaos Space Marines, and they're up against Blue Squad and Red Squad of Imperial Guard. Now, what they're going to try and do is they're going to try and kill Red Squad over here. The aim behind these Chaos Space Marines is they want to stay in combat, so they're going to try and trap Blue Squad in combat. Now, the simplest way of doing this is only declaring Red Squad as a target. So when I pile in a minute, I have to get within an inch of Red Squad, but I'm going to position myself so that one of the models here, particularly this one on the end here, I can surround that at 3 different points and I can trap him in combat. Now, because I didn't declare him as a target, I have to stay an inch away when I charge, but when I pile in and when I consolidate, I can trap one of those models in combat, and I can't actually attack it because I didn't ever declare it as a target. So I'll show you what I mean. So here we have it. This would be the charge move here. So as many as possible have piled into the Red Squad here, and I've kept an inch away from Blue Squad. Now, when I pile in, I can just move in towards the closest model here, and here. Now, I can put nearly all of my attacks onto this squad over here, into Red Squad, and Blue Squad is trapped in combat. So that's probably the most effective way. The other way you can do is you can perform a soft charge. So this would be your sort of classic soft charge here. The idea behind a soft charge is that you're trying to stop essentially you're trying to stop yourself from killing too many of your opponent's models. So again, the Chaos Space Marines have charged in here. They've only got 1 unit to declare. Now what they're going to do is this model here is within an inch of the enemy. Everyone else is outside of an inch of him, so they don't get to fight, and they're not within an inch of the model of the enemy. So this one person attacks. He's going to use his AP dash close combat attacks. He'll probably get 2 attacks. Hopefully he won't kill anything. It's a little bit more risky than charging 2 units. And what they'll do at the end there is when they consolidate, they'll trap this unit on 3 sides, again just doing the tri-chip maneuver, and then they can kill it in their opponent's turn. So they're the 2 obvious ways of trapping units in combat. And obviously if you've got a horde, well, if you've got a horde, you can just surround the whole thing. You don't have to worry about any of this fancy tri-tipping. So that's what tri-tipping is. Now the question is, how do you get out of it? What we're going to be talking about here is I've got a 3-step approach on how you can stop this from happening. So step number 1, don't let it happen in the first place. So just avoid it. So if you're playing against certain armies where you know it's going to happen, such as Genestealer Cult, Nurgle demons, anything which is close combat orientated, particularly if you're playing a gun line which doesn't like being in combat. They're going to do that to you. So think about how you're going to screen. Think about what you're screening with. So things that can fly. So Tau shield drones, for example, anything which can fly. If you screen with that, then your opponent can't trap them in combat because they can just move over them. So the first thing is think about what you're screening with, and it's not just things which fly. Think about anything you've got for a redeploy. If you've got cultists, remember you've got Tide of Traders, you can just remove them from the board. You could use redeployment from a dark matter crystal. Death Watch, they've got loads of ways of doing it. They can just bounce around on teleporters. They can use the Beacon Angelus, one of the relics, to redeploy a unit. Anything which removes them from the board. You've got psychic powers, you've got your Gate of Infinity. So you've got ways of doing this. The second thing to think about when we're talking about avoiding being trapped is remembering that there's certain positioning of your models which you can do to stop that from happening. I'm just going to go over that. So positioning your models properly is a great way of avoiding the trap. So what I've done here with the guardsmen is that I position them in a V shape, and by doing that, the front models here, they're not available to be trapped, and every model back here has been positioned so it's less than the inch and a bit base of these Chaos Space Marines here. So actually they have to get all the way over there to the back before they can start trapping models. So providing you've done your pre-measuring fine and you know that they're not going to be able to pile in and consolidate and get behind your models, you're absolutely fine. Now obviously if you've got an even bigger squad, you can close off that gap at the back there as well, and it makes it incredibly hard for the Chaos Space Marines here to start trapping any models. As soon as they start killing guardsmen, they run the risk of the guardsmen failing morale, and they'll just pull the models which have been trapped. So next thing to think about is using the terrain to your advantage. Now, by positioning the guardsmen against this wall there, I've done two things. Number one, the Chaos Space Marines can't get behind them to trap them in combat. The second thing to do is that actually, if they do manage to trap them in combat, they can just move up a level. So it makes it incredibly difficult for the Chaos Space Marines to be able to trap them in combat. So using terrain is really, really important. So creating that space. Now, if you don't have a handy piece of terrain to use, think about using models. So models which can fly, whether they're grav tanks which can fly away or whether they're flyers, is fantastic. By positioning a model which can easily leave combat, you've got all this space here that you can easily just fall back into. So even when the Khorne Berserkers here, even if they try and surround all of these guardsmen here, the plane flies away and they can fall back into the space where the plane was. Now obviously if you've just got lots and lots of guardsmen, you can just create a ring of guardsmen. You don't need to have anything on the inside of it. And by doing that, you can create internal space for them to fall away in. You can also do this with tanks which can't fly, as long as your opponent can't actually get round the back of your models. It's a fairly safe way, if you've got like a Rhino or something, position it next to your Imperial Guard squad there, and that stops your opponent being able to wrap around the back of them. The Rhino falls back the next turn, and then your Guardsmen have space to fall back in. So now that we've thought about positioning, the next thing to think about is counter assault. So know that if your opponent's an assault army, he's coming towards you, he's going to want to trap your units in combat. You need to have some ability to get them out of combat. So if you can't redeploy them, you need to have counter assault units ready to go in there. So the important thing here is don't put your counter assault units in reserve. It sounds really obvious, but if you start a lot of your units in reserve and your opponent starts hugging things, trapping them in combat, you can't do anything about it. So units in your army like Eversaw Assassins, which can just run in there and clear out a unit of Acolytes or something the Gene Stealers have got, are absolutely fantastic. Or Space Marine Captains with Thunderhammers, absolutely brilliant. Okay, so you've failed step one. They're about to trap you in combat. You can see it coming. So what do you do in this situation? So I think the first thing you can do is you can throw a spanner in the works. Anything you can do to reposition your models is really important at this stage. So what we've done here is we've piled in this Custodes jet bike. He can do a swooping dive, or he can even heroically intervene. And by piling it into the middle of this Chaos Space Marine squad, he's completely messed up their pile-ins and consolidates. So now they can't trap this poor little guardsman here in combat because he's no longer the closest model. And also, this Custodes jet bike gets to attack back, so there'll be less and less Chaos Space Marines to be able to do the pin in the first place. Now, the next thing you can do, there's two different ways you can do this, really. You can, if your opponent's set up to try and pin a model in combat, such as this guardsman here, what you can do is that you can combat interrupt if he doesn't move first with this unit. Now, there's two different things you can do. Number one, you can just try and base to base as many of his models as possible, and by doing that you limit his mobility. You also force him to attack with as many models as you can, so you're more likely to suffer casualties, or he's more likely to wipe the unit out. The second thing you can do is that you can try and base to base some of his models, but also set up your defense so he can't get round the back of you. So there we have it. I've interrupted with this unit, I've done some pile-ins, I've done some consolidates. What I've aimed to do here is base to base as many of these models as I can at the front here. So all three of these guys here, here and here are all base to base, as is this one here as well. And I've set my guys up in that classic V formation that we talked about earlier in the video, so that actually it's incredibly hard for the unbased ones at the back here to be able to get all the way around behind these guardsmen here. So that's really, really effective. Yes, it costs 2 command points, but actually this unit is no longer going to be trapped in combat. Obviously, you only get the opportunity to do this if your opponent attacks somewhere else first. Okay, so you failed step 1, you failed step 2. Your unit is now trapped in combat. So the question is, how do you get it out of combat? So remember what we talked about at the start of the video. You've got your redeploys, so your Beacon Angelus, you've got your psychic powers, there's lots of ways. You've got Tide of Traces, you've got ways of taking units off the board and redeploying them. That works absolutely fine. So remember, you've got that. Second of all, you've probably got ways of doing damage to units in combat. Now, you can't generally shoot. Well, you still have pistols. Most units still have pistols, so remember your pistols. There's things which don't target enemies in traditional ways, such as orbital bombardment, where you pick a point on the battlefield and everything around it can potentially get mortal wounds, including your own models most of the time. So that's really good. You've got abilities such as the Valhallan one, where you can shoot the enemy in combat. That's great if you hit them. If you don't hit them, you hit your own troops instead, I think on a roll of a 1. And obviously that's even more if your opponent's got minuses to hit. Now, you generally only need to kill 1 or 2 of your own models to get out of that trap. So again, use that to your advantage. Failing all of that, get ready with your counter assault, because you're going to have that ready from step number 1. Remember to pile them in there. Now, most of these models which are trapping something in combat, most of your units still alive, and they've engaged that unit now. Now, that leaves them really open to a counter bite. If you give them something really tough to kill, but you only tag it onto one end of the unit, they won't be able to do that in their own turn, because they'll be too busy killing the 5 guardsmen they've left over. And I'll show you what I mean. What we're doing here is we're charging in this Custodes jet bike into this unit of Chaos Space Marines which have trailed themselves out. So actually only 2 Space Marines can attack this jet bike back. Now, you can do this with any tough to kill model, because actually most of these Space Marines are going to have to go against the unit of guardsmen here, so they're not actually going to be able to get themselves out of combat on their turn. So they're going to be trapped, which is brilliant for a unit which was trapping you in combat. Now you've technically trapped them in combat. Now, anything tough to kill works, such as Lehman Russes can work, but remember, they're probably going to wrap you next turn. So if you've got a tough to kill tank, one of the Space Marine hover tanks, for example, if you charge that in, or your Eldar tanks, any of those, they're fantastic at just tying up a unit like this, particularly if you charge in some chaff at the other end of the unit as well, and you just hold that your whole unit up, and then you can still fall back with any units which can fly, so they can't tie you up. So this is a really, really effective way of just holding that unit up in combat and completely reversing the scales, really, because now you've trapped them in combat, which is brilliant. Okay, so there we have it. So that is my 3 steps on how you stop yourself getting trapped. So step number 1, see it coming. Position yourself well with your units. Remember which units are best to screen with, such as units which can fly, things which can redeploy. Use the terrain well. Step number 2, oh my god, it's about to happen. What can you do in an emergency situation? Can you quickly combat interrupt and form a position where they can't actually get round you? Can you just pile into them and force them to kill you? And step number 3, it's happened. What can you do? Can you counter-assault them? Can you smite your way out of combat? Can you redeploy out of combat as well? There's lots and lots of things you can do even when it has happened. And can you reverse the whole tide of things? Can you actually trap them back in combat? Because that's a really cheeky thing you can do sometimes. So guys, I hope you liked the video. If you've got anything else you want me to cover, leave it in the comment section down below, and I'll see you in the next video. And remember guys, if you're not subscribed already and you like what you're seeing here, hit the subscribe button. Take care.